for inviting me and for allowing me to be so informal to change the topic the night before. Actually, to present this talk is a bit more difficult for me. I'd say that if I have to, to order my research areas, I would say Wittgenstein's Tractatus is very easy for me to talk about. Then I'd say metaphysics of biology, because the last 6 years I've been thinking about that. Then vagueness, and then this, right? So it's not the topic that I have more in now in the front of my mind. But to tell the truth, this is a work that a book that I started to write with Ángel Dors. Ángel Dors was my PhD supervisor. He died on the year 2012. And I must recognize my debt to him now, because this was, a lot of conversations every week. One morning, 3 hours talking about this. Although, of course, I've been presenting this work, I don't know how often, but maybe every 2 or 3 years. And then I've been done work myself, but I must recognize my debt to him here. But in any case, I am more interested today in having feedback about my own proposal, right? So I'm going to present just the problem, as it were, with Perry, Evans, and Robert May. And after that, I will present my own proposal. It's going to be much on Frege doctrine of sense and reference and the origins in the Begriffschrift, in the conceptual notation. So in part, it's going to be very historical and very about Frege. Some parts can be very well known. I don't know that. I don't know how much you know about Frege. In any case, if some part is boring, because you know that, just think about something and forgive me for that, right? Okay, so why time in Frege, right? It's the motivation, I want really the motivation. No? So Frege's aim was, after writing his conceptual notation, to justify ontologically and semantically the language of the conceptual notation, right? And in that sense, temporal expressions were quite alien to Frege's objective and aim, right? Of course, if we think of natural science, several scientific claims require some kind of reference to time, because we'll see some examples later, right? But in a more important way, logicism and all the project in philosophy of mathematics by Frege was very alien to time, to temporal expressions, right? All truths are immutable and atemporal, and in the logical investigations, in particular in the thought, there is a tension between the atemporal nature of thoughts and the placement in time of the speaker who expresses such thoughts. And this is the crucial problem, right? That thoughts are eternal, their truth is also eternal, but the world is dynamic, the world about which the thoughts are, and also the subject who speaks is temporal, right? So then that's the problem. And then there is a kind of small debate about this, right? About temporal expressions in Frege, but it's been centered mainly on the account of indexicals in thoughts. This has been mainly the issue of the debate, right? And there is this tension between the theory of sense and the behavior of indexical expressions, how yesterday, tomorrow, today behave in terms of sense and reference in the thought. That's the problem. And then we have in the scholars a kind of division between neo-Fregeans and direct referentialists that are more worried, I think, but you are the experts about this, more worried about indexicality and about the kind of the project of indexicality in the theory of direct reference, and the neo-Fregeans that try like to make sense of Frege. No? So these are like the two tensions, and I'm going to be like in the middle. That's the thing, right? That I'm going to be in the middle. Okay, the debate, right? So Perry, in this seminal paper, defends the idea that indexical expressions raise an intractable problem for Frege, that senses are modes of presentation of objects, but indexical expressions like today and yesterday refer to many things. So their senses don't determine just one reference. That's mainly the problem, right? So in Frege we have like the sense determines reference, but this is not the case with the sense of this of these expressions, right? So he defends the idea that sentences including an indexical expression expressing complete senses, and the context in which they are uttered supplies a completing sense. This is more or less the idea. And then he defends the idea that it's not possible to run such senses in the minds of the subject who grasps the corresponding thoughts. This is what we were talking about. So while Evans and McDowell have this idea that it's better to think of the mind of the subjects who grasp those thoughts to solve the problem. And then they have this idea of the dynamic notion of sense as a way of keeping track of the object, right? So it's kind of the approach of the mind to the objects that are known that can overcome this problem, right? So the complete instance of indexical expressions allow to think of the same object on different times in the same way, associating the same sense to the expression, because they result from the capacity of the subject of keeping track of objects over time. And this is kind of the role of the temporal indexical expressions in Frege. And it comes May, that is my direct, it's like the closer to what I am going to propose, but I think that he doesn't get it yet, right? According to May, indexicals have senses that do not represent references, but which are nevertheless genuine constitutive saturated thoughts. These thoughts are neither true nor false, since the sense of the indexical expression does not present a reference. And the role of the content is precisely, and this is kind of weird, right, to supplement the thought with a reference and make it into a complete or full thought, which is then true or false. So his idea is that the context can complement the sense itself, the thought itself, and then the thought can be true or false. So he has this distinction between saturated thoughts and complete or full thought. That for me is very strange, this difference, right? I mean, there is a kind of way of accounting about that difference, but I am not sure that is Fregean. And then I have like some problems with May, right? A thought is that for which the question of truth can arise at all. So I don't see how there can be saturated thoughts that are neither true nor false. This is something that I think is not Fregean, right? And then it seems to be saying something like thought plus reference gives rise to a complete thought. So it's like mixing up the sense and reference. Yeah? And then here is a quote that I hope helps to see why I don't think May's proposal works. The word this tree is covered with green leaves are not sufficient by themselves to constitute the expression of thought. So it's not true that there is an expression of a saturated thought there. According to Frege, this is not the case, right? For the time of utterance is involved as well. Without the time specification thus given, we have not a complete thought. We have no thought at all. So if we have here this sentence, and we don't know about the context of utterance, in particular the time of utterance, then we don't have the expression of a thought at all. While May thinks that yes, there is a saturated thought, but we need this reference to complete, right, to have a full thought. Only a sentence with the time specification filled out, a sentence complete in every respect expresses a thought. So I am not I'm not happy with May's idea, right? Further insufficiencies of the work that there is done. No? There are other temporal expressions to which Frege pays attention along his works, not only indexicals, but other temporal expressions. In nonsense and reference, there is the verb tense, in particular present tense. I will be saying things about this and its role. Then the interrogative temporal adverbs, like when. Then temporal locutions with conjunctive role, like after or when. And then in the thoughts is the verb tense too, and then temporal adverbs that like already and still, and also indexicals like yesterday and today, right? So in a way, most authors have centered in the problem of indexicals, and I think that the issue is broader, it's much broader. So what is my aim, right? This is all I'm going to say about other people, so from now it's Frege and myself. So what is my aim? My aim is to offer an interpretation of Frege's claims about temporal expressions to cover the two insufficiencies. So one insufficiency is that I don't think the scholars have properly understood Frege's ideas, right? And the second insufficiency is that it's too restricted to indexicals, right? The strategy will be to present Frege's concept of temporal expression from the perspective of the genesis and evolution of his doctrines from conceptual notation to logical investigations, and in particular, sense and reference doctrines, right? Well, in particular, sense. I'm going to focus on sense and content, whatever that is. And the outcome will be a more balanced interpretation of Frege's account of temporal expressions, and to show that the difficulties and questions raised, this is very important, this is what I think I am really contributing to the issue, that the difficulties and questions raised by these expressions are more general. Temporal expressions exemplify more general difficulties that Frege encountered in developing his semantic project. This is what I want to convince you, right? And then the correction of some contemporary readings, but this is not something that I'm going to do today. There is no time for this. And okay, and this is the plan. Introduction to Frege's semantic theory. This is a very long section, right? Maybe a little bit dense. And then in section 2, I'll speak about temporal expressions in nonsense and reference. In section 3, temporal expressions in thoughts, and then conclusions. This is more or less the plan. It's very scholarly, and it will be, so let's go to the first idea, right? Okay, so the initial purpose of the consultant notation, as all of us know, is to construct a language in which the signs and the possible combinations of them correspond accurately to contents and possible combinations of contents. No? So there is this initial desideratum that I am going to be, defending during the whole talk, and that there must be a correspondence between the structure of signs and the structure of content, right? So that we are accessing content by analyzing signs. No? This is the initial desideratum that is alone Frege's idea, and that I think is going to create different problems, right? The motivation is the logicism, and thus the starting point was a distinction between what is relevant for the inference, the conceptual content, and what is irrelevant for the inference. And then there in conceptual notation there is this notion of Sinn, sense, that is what is irrelevant for the inference. So what is related to the subject, location, and the subject emotions. It's funny because he uses this term Sinn to refer to what in nonsense and reference, and later he's going to call coloration or coloration of language, and right. Okay, and then there's a twofold initial obstacle for the initial desideratum, for this parallelism thesis between sign and content, because there are multiple ways in which the same content can be analyzed, and multiple ways in which the same content can be determined. These are two different problems, different ways of analyzing content and different ways of determining content, right? The most well-known is the first problem, right? The multiple ways in which the same content can be analyzed in terms of function and argument. This distinction has nothing to do with this is Frege's terms, right? This thing has nothing to do with the conceptual content. It concerns only our way of looking at it, so we can analyze Kato killed Kaito as one, as one argument, another argument that is different, and then two arguments. And these are three possible ways of analyzing it. And the goal is to introduce generality, and that's the idea of law, that is law of pure thought. Luis knows about this a lot, no? This is like logical law, logic of pure thought. But on sense of reference, he's going to apply this idea also to natural law, the law of nature. So like for every time or whenever something happens, so this like regularity of facts of nature, right? So it's going to be, so this idea of generality is going to appear later on, applied also to natural sciences, right? Not only to formal sciences as in conceptual notation. And then there is this idea of the different ways in which the same content can be determined, right? So different expressions can designate the same content. Signs express modes of determination of the content. I'm going to defend a difference between mode of determination and mode of presentation, right? Here in conceptual notation, there is the mode of determination. And there's the sign of equality, where two expressions are related by the equality of content when they designate the same content, right? The example is the one of here. You must, I'm sure that you remember. So, sorry, suppose it's important that this is tangential. So I'm sure that you remember this example in the conceptual notation, where Frege says that this point can be determined by ostension, just by pointing out the point, or by making turn, girando, this line till it is perpendicular to the first one, right? And then you can determine it by this geometrical way, or you can determine it just by pointing out, just by ostension, right? But the content of A is just the point. The content of A is not the mode of determination at all. It's not the mode of determination at all. The mode of determination is external to the content. It's just the way the subject kind of can approach the content, right? So this is the idea, no? Modes of determination are, so to say, external to the content, determining the content from outside, and this is what is captured in the different expressions. And then we have this other important thesis, that is mode of determination, two different signs A and B, determining two different ways the same content, and each of those two modes of determination is not part of the content of the signs A and B. So here we see why on sense and reference at the beginning, Frege says that in the conceptual notation he had defended the idea that the identity was a relation between signs, no? Because here we just have signs and how they approach, they determine some content from outside, right? And then I have some problems with this. I have some problems with this, this Frege's proposal, right? Some questions, difficulties of this way of understanding A equals B that are not, so the problems I see are not the cognitive ones of on sense and reference. Of course, they are well known. Frege says those in. First, there is a tension between the content of A equals B and the content resulting from combining the contents of A equal and B. Because when you say A equal B, you are not talking about the content of A. You are talking about A as a sign. A as a sign, and then you are saying about the sign, about the expression, something. But A has a content, equals has a content, and B has a content. So you have an expression, as it were, A equals B, you know, that is about expressions, but then has some, so the initial desideratum, this correspondence about about the analysis of the sign, the expression, and the structure, the content, here is a problem to see how that works, right? Then another problem is what is the status of modes of determination? They are not part of the content of the sign. The mode of determination expressed by A is not part of the content of A. But they really determine the content. So they are completely external, but they really determine the content, right? That is where they are relevant, and the diversity of Sinn and sign of equality of content is necessary. So it's not, it's not a question of the way in which we express a sign, right? Like this or this. No, this is not the problem. It's something, the mode of determination has something that relates the sign with the content. It has something that relates the sign with the content. I'll put it later, but this is, we have A and B, and we have here the mode of determination. This is a content, and then this is the mode of determination, is outside the content, but it's not something accidental of B. It's more important. Please, can you explain that? What is this arrow? What is this arrow? If it is not part of the content, but determines the content, and it's not an accidental feature of the sign, but is the status, right? That's another problem. And then there is this kind of dissociation of semantic relations, that we have A is related to its content, a designation means its content, and A is related to the mode of determination. So in a way, we can start seeing here sense and reference. Anyway, I'll talk about this later. We have a relation of A as a sign with the content, but then of A as a sign with this mode of determination. There are two semantic relations. They are hidden. There seems to be just one determining the content, but there are two the semantic relations. The one of the sign with the content and the one of the sign with the mode of determination. So this is my kind of reflection about this, page in conceptual notation that is creating some problem. I'm going to say something about the end of the talk. I kind of think that indexical expressions are modes of determinations. That's the end of the idea, right? So that's why I am so slow here, even if it is very well known. I don't know if it is very well known, but so in a way, what I'm going to defend is that in the thought, Frege is coming back to the conceptual notation. It's like, so the problem is given in sense and reference, but if you get back to conceptual notations, you have a way to deal with this, right? Although all these problems remain, as it were. No, okay, so the summary of conceptual notation would be what is relevant and what is not relevant for the inference, the multiple analysis of content into functions, simple or compound, and arguments, or into multiple contents, and then multiple modes of determination of one and the same content. This would be conceptual notation. So let's go to sense and reference. I go a little bit into function and concept. When this is not sense and reference, it's all the phase of the decade of the semantic essays of Frege, right? So I'm taking into account these three articles: function and concept, on sense and reference, these four, on concept and object, and considerations of sense and reference. Considerations of sense and reference is very important. I'll say something about this, but to understand what I'm going to propose. Okay, then there is this important distinction about function and argument that we all know. And the relevant point here is that conditional clauses in nonsense and reference allow to express a thought in the form of universal laws. No? If a number is less than 1 and greater than 0, its square is less than 1 and greater than 0. So that we can understand that as a generalization with a quantifier. And then this presence of a determination in the main and subordinated clause allows to establish the connection proper of a law, no? For every case, for every time. So I want here to insist again about generality and the distinction of function and concept that is going to allow us to consider times as objects on which we can generalize. That's the idea, objects on which we can generalize, and then we could have then scientific laws or laws of nature in that way, right? That would be the idea. And then there is, of course, the doctrine of sense and reference that is very well known. The expression takes on the role of being the criterion of identity of senses, and then there is the idea that mode of determination evolves into mode of presentation. But that means that it becomes the part of the content and can ground the diversity of cognitive value. We all know that. I'm not going to explain that. And then modes of presentations serve or help to illuminate aspects of the reference, right? And then instead of having mode of determination thesis, we have mode of presentation thesis, so that two signs A and B express two different senses that contain two different modes of presentation of the same reference and express aspects through which the reference is given to us. But now, like I see, well, it's like this arrow has like some kind of independence here, right? And content, this would be the sense, no? And content is the object, reference, and the sense. No? That's the difference with mode of determination. Well, I have here, but I think that we all know this. No? These are the relations between sense and reference that are very well known. And then I'm going to present a threefold difficulty here, right? Three difficulties. The first one is very well known. One, many relations to sign to its sense. It's very well known in sense and reference. But B and C are also known, but maybe not so well known. Those are the ones that I'm going to focus more. You know? So these are difficulties that appear in sense and reference for the initial desideratum. That is a desideratum that I think is present in Frege from the beginning to the end of his works. It's present the whole trajectory. So one main relations to its sign, multiplicity of ways to determine the same content, and multiple relation between a sentence and a sense. So this is the first problem, very quickly. The relation between the expression and its content of the conceptual notation has now given rise to a multiplicity of relations, sign and its sense, many one expressing, no? This one, sign to its sense, many one. Sense and reference, many one presenting, sign and reference, many one designating. But this is a problem. There is also sign and its sense, one many. This is the problem, right? This is the problem. And then the classical problems are the sense of proper names, that we can associate different senses to proper names. Also the fact that different people can associate different senses to the same sign, right, according to the cognitive situations and so on. Okay, I think that those are very well known, and I had like also this quote in the thought to see that this problem is present the whole time, right? But let's go to the second one, right? To the second problem, that is the multiplicity of ways to determine the same content. That is a problem that is not so well known. And then I want to present this paradigmatic example of the difficulty for ID that I have here in mind. This is a quote in function and concept, and then I'll have another one in considerations on sense and reference. So here is this problem is not on sense and reference, right? This problem is in function and concept and in considerations on sense and reference, the problem that I am going to say, right? So what Frege says is that the fact that different functions like these two ones that you have here have the same value range can be expressed properly as an identity between their two value ranges. And then this would be the expression, this identity. So here is to say that this is the value range of this function, this kind of sign on the epsilon, and here on the alpha. So this is the value range of this function, this is the value range of this function, and they have the identity. So this is identity of objects, because value ranges are objects in Frege's theory. So here we are expressing something as an identity statement between two signs that represent objects. But he says, no, if we understand this expression in the same sense as before, that is, the equation is to hold whatever argument may be suited for x, this expresses the same sense, but in a different way. It presents the sense as an equality holding generally, whereas the newly, that is the identity of value ranges, the newly introduced is the identity of value ranges. Introduced expression is simply an equation, and its right side, and equally its left side, stands for something complete in itself. So here we have something that is incomplete, and we can have a quantifier before and express this as a generalization on a functional expression. While here we have something that is the identity of two objects by means of two proper names of value ranges. But we are expressing the same content, the same sense, the same thought, by different, as we were in first order logic, with different signos principales, main signs, a complete different analysis of the sign. And then in considerations of sense and reference, he introduces a new symbol, that is this one, for the identity of functions as objects, as incomplete objects. So here we have three different expressions, the two ones we had before, the identity of value ranges, the generalization, and the identity of functions, with different signs, with different analysis of the expression. We have expressed what is essentially the same thought. So these are different routes to analyze content. None of them can be obtained from others by means of the analysis of some of the constituents. So it's as it were, as we had here the sign, and then the content were determined in that way, and we really don't know what are the constituents of the thought, what are the constituents of the sense. We really don't know what are those constituents, right? I hope this helps to understand the whole thing, right? So first we have, this is conceptual notation, we have the two signs, the terms determines mode of determination, right? Then we have on sense and reference, this is very well known, the two signs, the senses, the reference, the sign expresses a sense and presents a reference, and the sign designates the reference. But we have seen that there, at the time of the semantic essays, we have also this idea. So we have a sign. In this case, remember the three expressions before, right? Generalization, identity of value ranges, and identity of functions, a sign that determines a sense, and this presents a reference, right? I hope you see what the problem is, and I hope you can start thinking about temporal expressions and how this is going to be all put together, right? So, similarity of the how can we now establish which are the constituents of the thought expressed by these three expressions above? Below. If expressions do not serve for the recognition of when two sentences express the same thought, how can they express a thought at all? So, if expressions don't give us the conditions for the thought, then how can they express a thought at all? The problem of indetermination of the constituents of the thought also raises the problem of the indetermination of the constituents at the level of reference. Since it is the contents of the thought that are going to present the reference, then this problem can be extended to reference too. And then the third point is a multiple relation between a sentence and a sense. That is also, well, this is in this subordinated, all the second part of sense and reference, right? A sentence can express its sense, is, the standard official doctrine. Then a sentence can also presuppose other thoughts. A sentence can indicate or suggest accompanying subsidiary thoughts which are not part of the expressed sense, or a sentence can indicate or suggest accompanying subsidiary thoughts which are part of the expressed sense. So we have here a sentence and a lot of relations to thoughts and senses, right? Sentence that express a thought and presuppose another thought is the classical example, whoever discovered the elliptic form of the planetary orbits died in the misery. There was someone who discovered the elliptic form of the planetary orbit. So this true thought is presupposed in one by one, right? Then we have sentences that express one or more thoughts and indicate accompanying subsidiary thoughts which are not part of expressed thoughts. Then Napoleon, who recognized the danger to his right flank, himself led his guards against the enemy position. And then the subsidiary thought that is not part of the thought expressed is the knowledge of the danger was the reason why he led the guards against the enemy position. Well, 3 can be true, even if Napoleon had made up his mind before knowing that. So it's a subsidiary thought. It's something that accompanies a thought that comes to your mind that is suggested, but it's not part of the sense expressed, right? And then sentences that express one or more thoughts and indicate accompanying subsidiary thoughts, which are part of the expressed thoughts, because ice is less dense than water, it flows on water, and then the subsidiary thought is if anything is less dense than water, it flows on water. So we have here the kind of drawing of the idea. No? So we have the sentence that expresses one thought. It can presuppose some thought, and it can hint another thought. And then sometimes we have a sentence that expresses one thought and hints one thought, and then both are part of the content. So think now about the initial desideratum, right? How you get two thoughts in one expression on it when one is a subsidiary thought that is hinted, that is only hinted. No? How can the initial desideratum be here present? It's very problematic. No? It's very problematic. So what is the summary of the difficulty and questions? Are presupposed and accompanying thoughts mere subjective elements? Are they irrelevant for truth and inference? In the case of sentence indicating accompanying subsidiary thoughts, which are part of the expressed thoughts, how can the subsidiary thought be expressed through the expressions that constitute the sentence? That the initial desideratum problem, right? How can that happen, right? So there are a lot of commitments in Frege's semantical doctrines that are very magical. I mean, that you don't know how that works, right? Okay. So let's go to the last one. This is shorter, I think, and then we'll go to the temporal expressions. That is the new part, right? The thought, I mean, I need to introduce all that I am introducing. Maybe it's very well known, but it's necessary in order to see how I am going to relate this with temporal expressions. Otherwise, it doesn't, I wouldn't be able to do that, right? Then thoughts, the primary concern is the temporality and immutability of thoughts. I think this is not important. We have this distinction between grasping and expressing, judging or acknowledging and asserting, but let's go to the interaction with time, right? So we have an interaction between 3 times. One is atemporal, but as it were 3 times. One, the time of events and changes in the world, the subject who thinks and expresses thoughts in time, and the temporality of the thoughts that is about the temporality of thoughts that are about time and is perhaps expressed by a subject in time. So this is the crisis, the problem. No? And then we have also an idea that is crucial for my purposes, the idea that the content expressed by a sentence is different from the thought expressed by a sentence, right? So a sentence can express more content than the thought expressed, like horse and steed, right? Or a sentence can express less content than the thought to be expressed by means of it, like it rains here, like indexicals, no? Right? And then this is the quote for you to see that this is really Frege's. It's not my that the content in halt of a sentence often goes beyond the thought expressed by it, but the opposite often happens too. The mere wording, which can be made permanent by writing or the gramophone, does not suffice for the expression of the thought. For the expression of the thought, this is crucial. We'll come back to this later. So let's go now to temporal expressions, right? Maybe this was very well known. I am sorry about that, but I needed really to give this class in order to present how I understand now temporal expressions, right? Okay, conceptual notation. There is no time in conceptual notation. I didn't find, there is this idea of sense, what is coloration in sense and reference, that has something to do with the subject, right? But Frege does not pay any attention to that. So, I cannot construct anything with sense about conceptual notation and time. So I'll go on sense, in sense and reference. That also includes other semantical articles of that decade, right? The 90s. And then the thought, of course, right? Then temporal expressions in sense and reference. Frege deals first with adverbial clauses of time that can be used to construct proper names. So we would have temporal objects, times as temporal objects, and we have kind of descriptions that are expressed in sentences. This is the idea, right? And also with the possibility of quantifying over temporal objects, which provides a means by which the generality proper of a law can be expressed, right? So the first one, the idea that we can construct proper names for temporal objects with adverbial clauses of time, right? After PQ, after Schleswig-Holstein was separated from Denmark, Prussia and Austria quarreled. It expresses only one thought, but the temporal clauses, that is the temporal clause, temporally determines the main clause because it is a complex name for a temporal object. So that my analysis would be Prussia and Austria to quarrel at, it would be a function, the time determined, designated by the expression after Schleswig-Holstein was separated from Denmark. Okay, so we have a temporal object determined by the adverbial temporal clause, right? And the analysis would be a functional one where the argument is a temporal object that is expressed by means of this complex expression, right? Frege considers both the possibility that the thought is just presupposed, like in descriptions. If this thought is false, the whole sentence is neither true nor false. This would be like the example, whoever discovered the elliptical shape of the, okay. And part of the content of the sentence, like in causal clauses. If this thought is false, then the whole sentence is false. Both can be considered. So I'm thinking now about the thought expressed by the description, that is inside the description. What is the relation of that thought with the whole thought? Well, but it can be these two ways, he considers both ways, but it does not affect the understanding of the whole analysis as I presented before. Then we have this other kind of expressions when PQ or whenever PQ. And then I would like you to see the contrast between the sun, between B1 and B2, right? When the sun is in the Tropic of Cancer, the longest day in the northern hemisphere occurs. Or the sun is in the Tropic of Cancer, right? We have these two, is, no? We have this is and this is, both are present time, right? And I think that the common feature of both are that we have also a temporal argument here. Of course, let's see, we can ignore the temporal argument and not analyze it. But if we want, we can analyze the temporal argument too. Because one could say, well, it's like in the case of Cato killed Cato, right? I can just have an argument of a function of one argument, or two arguments, or three arguments, well, of two in the case of kill, but here of three, because time is another argument more, right? So the difference is that in two, the time is determinate, is the present, while in one, the time is indeterminate. It's actually an X, it's a variable for every time, no? For every. So this would be the analysis. Maybe the easiest one is the two. Let us start with this one. The sun to be in the Tropic of Cancer at the present time. I am here ignoring the time of utterance. I'll come to this later, right? I am presupposing that we are saying this at this moment, right? I am saying it at that, so it's the present time, the time of utterance. But, and then the analysis of one would be for every x, if the sun to be in the Tropic of Cancer at x, the longest day in the northern hemisphere to occur at x, and these x are temporal objects again, right? But here is for every, for every time. So it is possible to express regularities, like laws, but there's a new difficulty for the initial desideratum, because there are more ways to analyze the content, right? We have here different ways in which the sun is in the Tropic of Cancer can be analyzed, because I can have sun as argument, I can have Cancer as argument, I can have the sun, sorry, Tropic of Cancer, right? The sun and the Tropic of Cancer as arguments, but I also can have the time at which it is there as an argument. So I would have here 3 arguments, right, in this analysis. The last one, that is the one that is interested for my, is important for my project. The present time, the sun, the Tropic of Cancer will be the arguments, and then will be x to be in y at zeta, at z. So there is a multiplication of problems for the initial desideratum. So let's go to the thought. I'm going to finish, maybe 10 minutes more and I finish. Temporal expressions in thought. So there is this problem of the interaction between the time of what is said, time of being in the world, and the time at which it is said, time of utterance. And then the idea that I said before about content and thought not being the same, right? So we have still and already as adverbs that are, and so my analysis would be that if we have something like Alfred has still not come, there is a thought express, Alfred has not come, and a hinted sense, that is, Alfred's arrival is expected. Hinted sense is not part of the thought express. Is it part of the content? Is it part of the content? I mean, Frege has there some problems. So if we want to analyze a sentence like this one, when Alfred had already arrived, I joined him and his family for lunch, we'll have a thought expressed that if I join Alfred's family for lunch at a time after Alfred's arrival, a thought presuppose that Alfred arrived, and then a thought hinted Alfred's arrival was expected, right? So this multiplication of thoughts that are related to a sentence, and the difficulty to see how the analysis of the sign can lead me to that structure, right? And then the tense of the verb, right? The square of 2 is 4, and then the present tense has as a role, this is also present, sorry, this is something that I should maybe introduce in nonsense and reference, because this is also present in conceptual notations, and this idea of the eternal sense of is, right? That in mathematics, in arithmetic, in logic, is doesn't have a temporal dimension, but is atemporal, it's like eternal, right? It's precisely to eliminate time restriction, but the tree is covered with green leaves. The present tense indicates time. And also the idea that is true is timeless, right? So the difficult analysis is 2, of course. One, pues, it's not difficult, but the difficult analysis is 2. And then the idea would be, this is what is different from what other authors have said before, that sentence plus time of utterance allows the expression of thought. And the incomplete expression of a thought is different from the expression of an incomplete thought. That is what, for instance, Robert May was saying. So Robert May was saying that there is the expression of an incomplete saturated thought that, that the time was not there, but he needed the time to contribute the reference there to have the complete thought. And I prefer to say what Frege says. That's it. No, the problem is that we try to express something there is like a trying, an attempt to express something, but fails, fails because something is missing, that is the time of utterance. I'm thinking, if you see this, expressed on the blackboard, right? So you have like this sign in the gramophone, the written sign, and then you don't know the time of utterance. It is not that that expresses an incomplete thought, but that is not an expression at all. It's like an attempt of expression. That would be the idea of what I think Frege is saying. So if we have, for instance, Obama is sad, we have two different interpretations in sense and reference and in thought. I am defending that Frege evolves here, right? Obama is sad in sense and reference, firstly, right? Expresses a sense, a mode of presentation that is incomplete, not an incomplete thought. Namely, Obama is sad at t, at x, t is a variable of time. This is a functional expression, and therefore the sense expressed presents the corresponding function. Obama is sad at t. Or I like leaving empty the variables to see like the unsaturatedness of the thing that could put a t there, right? And then in thought, since the expression Obama is sad is composed of expressions that express senses, modes of presentation, Obama and is sad, there is a sense that arises as the composition of those senses. Not a thought, a sense that is, you know, that as a composition. This compound sense is not a thought and does not present anything, although its parts do present something, right? So we have a combination of senses there, but not properly speaking a thought. What about yesterday, today? And then yesterday, today, I defend the idea that they are modes of determination of the same thought. External to the content, they determine thought from the temporal perspective of the speaker. So we will have here, sorry, it's good. We have here yesterday, today, as way of determining from the external point of view a particular content. No? That would be the idea. So if we have, for instance, the day, the temporal object, December 4th, 2012, we have a temporal object that can be designated by the expression, the proper name, December 4th, 2012. We have a temporal object can be given in different ways, different modes of presentation, like for instance, the day on which Obama is sad, the day before the December 5/12, 2012. This would be different descriptions that correspond, that express different modes of presentations of this temporal object, right? And then it's a temporal object that can be determined, not presented, that can be determined in different ways, like modes of determination, like today must the context, or today, or yesterday must the context, December the 5th, or no, that would be the idea. These modes of determination are not part of the content of the thought expressed by sentences, including today and yesterday, right? So yesterday P plus context expresses a thought, yesterday P without context does not express a thought. This is my conclusion. So let me recapitulate. I have like three kinds of conclusions. One is the general outcome of the development of Frege semantic doctrines. Another one, kind of series of conclusions, refer to the fact that Frege's initial desideratum comes across different obstacles along the development of Frege's ideas. And temporal expressions show examples of such obstacles. No? Because in a way, what I am saying, maybe I have not been explicit about this, no? but that the problem of yesterday, tomorrow, today of indexical expressions is the same one as we have seen in non-considerations and sense and reference with the identity of functions, the generality, and the identity of value ranges. No? We have different ways in which a content is determined. But we don't know really the constituents of the content. We don't know the constituents of the thought. All of them in the case of indexicals, of temporal expressions. And then some historical considerations. So the general outcome is that we have a twofold tripartition of content. Reference, sense express, and thought express, and plus of content that is these hinted senses, right? And then another one that is reference, sense determined, thought determined, and mode of determination expressed. Of course, when we have, if I have time, let me say something. Then about the second point, how the problem of the initial desideratum is the idea that instants and periods of time are objects and that they can be named and referred to generates an extra multiplicity of ways in which any sentence in which a temporal determination is relevant can be analyzed, as we have seen, right? Temporal adverbs express modes of determination of thoughts rather than modes of presentation of references. This is what is not, I mean, this is what is original in my contribution. Then incomplete expressions of a thought, but not, it's important to understand those expressions in which we don't know the time of utterance as incomplete expression of a thought and not as expressions of an incomplete thought. This is what I am criticizing in other interpretations. And if temporal indexicals raise a problem for Frege, that problem is the one of the interference between the mode of determination of the sign and mode of presentation of sense. It's like if Frege had in mind that he had mode of determination in conceptual notation and mode of presentation in sense and reference, but modes of determination keep appearing all the time, keep coming there, right? And that problem is present in other expressions too. This is the general problem that I want to. And then some historical consideration. Frege's ideas in thoughts resemble his initial idea in conceptual notation because it's coming back to the modes of determination. And this idea of that there is a plurality of modes of determination of the same thought is already present in the 90s, and in these functions, different ways of analyzing the identity of functions. So thank you very much. These are other estos, and thank you, Escarri Casco, for your attendance. I hope, because I figured out this yesterday, I hope it made sense. Okay.
So, we have
So now I'm going to take notes because I changed the topic in order to get advantage of the discussion. So I'll try to learn, yeah.
Very simple question. When you include the notion of index senses,
Sorry,
the index senses,
sí.
well, doesn't it this kind of senses normally come close to kind of Kaplanian
I'm not sure. So are you asking about the relation between the hinted senses and Kaplanian characters? I don't think, I usually had more, but maybe I have not thought about this before, right? So I should think about this before. But I usually relate more these hinted senses with Grecian approaches, like the idea that there are like some thing that can be conveyed, but is not expressed. So I tend to, like, if I had to relate these hinted senses of Frege with something that has happened afterwards in the philosophy of language, I tend to relate it to intentionalist or psychologist theories of meaning, where there is implicatures or something like is suggested, that is conveyed by an expression, but is not what the expression literally means. That would be, it's a way, I mean, a way to, I know that I am not replying to your question because I have not thought about it before, and I had not good intuitions about how to relate it. But I think that in saying how I can relate these hinted senses to contemporary philosophy of language, you can understand why I don't see exactly how to relate it to Kaplan, though I should think about that, and I'll take a note to have a look.
Yes, I like your thought very much, but I mean,
actually this thing to do. What's about the, I will ask you a three questions perhaps. When he uses the word content in half in his first words, like the Begriffschrift, but I cannot remember that he uses other important words like in and reference. I don't remember that Frege uses the word inhalt and that word inhalt in this article, and I cannot remember what it uses it also in the plot. I can be mistaken about this third consideration, but I don't remember at all that Frege uses the word inhalt in the article of sense and reference.
I agree. Because he has dissociated content in sense and reference, and he's very careful not to have content there, the word content then. There is no content anymore. There is sense and reference. But the way in which he introduces sense, what I am saying is that the way with introduces sense makes it into the previous notion of content, as it were, right? But I agree, and it is present in the thought, that also for sure, not at all, but not much. But I gave a quote where it is present in the thought.
I was a little surprised that you put so much weight on the notion of content.
Okay.
As part of the analysis of the work of Frege. Second, I am not clear about the relation between thought and content. Sometimes it appears that they are similar, but in other contexts they are different. For instance, when you make a tripartite division in the content, then according to that it is clear that content is not the same as thought. Thought would be a part of content. And the third question is, you have spoken several times that two expressions have the same sense or what, and my question would be, what do you think, what is Frege's criterion for the identity of sense?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I am criticizing, that he doesn't have one. So that's the idea. So the first one, I think that I have already replied by saying that I agree that there is not use of inhalt, to my knowledge. I mean, I should say it, but in sense and reference. But I think that it is in the thought. And then I have to think about this idea that there is too much weight on content in Frege. I mean, this comes from, I want to say something here. This.
In other words, if Frege uses the word inhalt, in the dictionary, and later uses it is the same also of content in both words.
I don't think so. No, I mean, I would say that in Begriffschrift, in conceptual notation, is a very technical term. That is what is relevant for inferences. It's a very acuñado, no, very precise term, very technical one. And in the third one, he needs a word, a general word, to say something different from sense, and this would be content. This is my intuition, that it's not like the same exactly one, right? Then about the third one, I completely agree that I have tried to show that Frege wants the analysis of the expression to give the criterion of identity of senses, but that doesn't work. This is one. I mean, this has been criticized by different authors, but I think that the particular point that I am presenting here is not so worked out, right? So, but he doesn't have, or in other words, he has one identity criterion that would be the expression. So the expression, the sign expresses a sense, and that would be the identity criterion, but it doesn't work. I mean, it doesn't work. There are other problems, right? And then the second one, I think that was the more difficult one. Can you say it again?
Sometimes in your talk, I thought that you use the word thought and content as it was for me not clear. And last yes, when I did this part of the content, and sometimes in your talk, that the notion of thought really near the notion of content.
No. Then I should go over it. The notion of thought is very, very technical, I think, is der Gedanke. It's very important that it can be true or false. I think that this is crucial for defining thought in Frege. And the notion of content is more general, because we can also speak about content of expressions that are not sentences, right? So it's not a notion, it's not such a technical notion. It's a word that, a notion that Frege has recourse to have this idea that sometimes something can express more, as it were, than the thought express, or less than the thought express. And then what is that more, or what is that less? Content. That's more or less the idea of content, right? In the case of, still, it is more. In the case of yesterday, it's less, right? Of?
The content of a thought. Do you think contents and properties of thought?
No.
Of sentences?
Maybe of sentences. If I say that, I was wrong in my wording, right? It was a kind of dyslexia problem. Yeah. No. The contents are features of language.
So thank you. I really enjoyed the talk. It's super clear and nice. And I have a lot of questions. One of the things I love is, but I love many ways, this idea of treating temporal expressions and indexicals using more of determination distinction. I think it's super interesting. But I would love to know more. One of the things I love about the presentation is, because one of the things we've been discussing is Frege had most of the tools he needed, and he presented all of the problems he then was going to discuss in the conceptual work, and then he changed the sense of reference. But I like your idea of in the thought he actually kind of came back, because this distinction between mode of determination and mode of presentation, I think is very important, and usually is not forgotten, and I think is very, very, very important. And one of the things that I wanted to point out, so in function and concept, he introduces the sign for the identity of functions. And one of the book that Perry will be talking about, and the paper we also talked about.
The thing one, the Perry thing one, the one on Frege.
We have a paper on that, and the idea is look in the Begriffschrift, in the famous section 8, when he introduces the laws of determination, he actually introduces a new sign, the identity of content, which is not 2 but 3.
Yeah.
And the idea was to capture this that you said, so when two signs are in the content centers, they refer to the content sign, they refer to himself, and then you have the mode of determination. And I think you could have normal identity of content, identity of function. I think that would be.
That's nice.
That would be a nice way.
That's very nice.
One thing about that is that then he was misinterpreting himself in sense and reference when he starts talking about identity, and he's like, well, you don't say it is an identity of design, you don't say it's identity of number, object. You actually say that this is the problem, that sometimes they stand for themselves and sometimes they stand for the content. But in the sense of reference, he just says, well, I assume it was identity of design. You actually have this mode of determination, and it was actually much more.
It's very interesting, because this idea of this new sign is very true. there is also something about that in the Tractatus. So I have to look at, and I have a kind of some idea there of a paper about this, like equivalence. I call it the equivalence sign, right? The three. Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, I have like to kind of try. I'll have a look to this paper that you mentioned and see if I should change, you know, the way to put it using this new sign, at least in conceptual notation, and it could help to illustrate better the difference between modes of determination and mode of presentation. That is my aim, right?
Yeah, and as you say, when he talks about arithmetical identities, he uses the normal identity, and then he introduces the other one. I think you mentioned the well. You have something like 2 + 2 is 4, and that's no problem.
Yeah.
But then you have this kind of identities where you have two, you know, it's not exactly identity between the signs, it's not identity between the objects. You have this search.
Okay.
And our interpretation is that this is why he introduced the identity of content. And then he seems to ignore it in such a reference.
That's interesting. That's interesting. That's very nice. But you have not related it to temporal expressions, right?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
There's a problem of co-instantiation, the fact that two different signs can instantiate the same content, but as you say, there are other problems, like how do we explain that these two random different signs refer to the same? So there's also a problem with the signs and a lot of levels there.
Yeah, exactly.
But he pointed them out in the book.
Yeah.
He kind of solved it in sense of reference. Not really.
Not really, no.
So I like the idea of
not really.
coming back to the model determination.
Yeah, exactly.
And the idea of the difference between incomplete expression of the thought and expression of the thought.
Yeah, this is an intuition. It's like kind of, I know that it's not very spelled out in detail, but I think that this is crucial. So it's like we have like some words and some kind of sense as a consequence of the combination of the senses expressed by those words. But the expression fails because we don't know the time of utterance. This is the intuition that I have. That's the intuition I have. More than an expression of something incomplete, that I think this, maybe in sense and reference that makes sense, but in the thought I don't think so. No. Mm-hmm.
I just would like to ask about that distinction because
I think I don't get it.
Yeah.
Yes, it's crucial. I mean, what's the difference between the expression of thought and the expression of an incomplete thought? Well, I guess that, sure, we are talking about sentences, utterances. It's a sentence that allegedly incompletely expresses a thought. But in this case, it would be an incomplete expression of many different thoughts.
No, it would be a complete, no, that's the idea. So this is because, that's a very interesting question because it obliges me to, so in a way, I'll go to your question. So I'm going to say something that I don't know if I said in the talk, that it seems it's not related, but it is. So in a way, when I worked in the past on Wittgenstein, I had this idea that the readers, when they read Wittgenstein, they try to understand Wittgenstein from the way from what they have in mind, right? So, you know, for instance, if one has in mind Kripke, maybe reads the Tractatus and sees essences in the objects and in the relation of the possible states of affairs that an object can get into, and then has like, it's not that he's giving an essentialist interpretation, it's just that he is influenced by the way he understands language because he's a Kripkean, because he has, and then unconsciously reads the Tractatus and understands more than what Wittgenstein said, or a different thing, right? So I think that the same happens with Frege many times, and in particular with this discussion about indexical expressions, that people approach that problem from particular views that they have, I don't know, McDowell, Evans, particular views that they have on on minds and subjects, right? or Perry about all his work about indexicals, right? And then he goes to Frege and tries to understand Frege. It's not that he's not fair, it's just that he understands that way. And then, now, no, to your question, and then, because I think that in the question there is something similar going on, right? Because you think, well, there is the expression of many possible thoughts. And I say, no, when you see, what I think Frege thinks is, when you see those words, like, I don't know, the leaves of the tree are green, you see this here. Suppose that we say something like, let's say an example, the leaves of the tree are brown, right? Because it's not right now. And then you understand the words. You can associate senses to the words. And then as a consequence, you have a kind of composed sense that is not a thought, because it can be neither true or false, but it's not like a class of thoughts either, according to how you complete them, right? And then what happens is that you need something else to be able to express a particular thought and evaluate, assess its truth or falsehood, right? And then what else you need? The time of utterance, but you don't know it. It's here. I mean, it's here, right? The words are here, and you don't know exactly the time of utterance. And then that is what I call the incomplete expression of a thought. Then a thought is not expressed at all. Maybe the problem is in saying incomplete expression of a thought. No, there is an incomplete expression of something. Yeah, no, it's nice. It's nice. You are pressing me to express it in a different way. Yeah.
I would like to develop it. Just yeah, I mean,
yeah. I see your point.
I don't understand the thought. I mean, maybe it has to be the last thing that you just said, that maybe it's an incomplete expression of something, but maybe not a thought. I mean, you said before that when we have a sentence, a temporal sentence, plus a context, plus a time, I guess, then we have complete thought.
Yeah.
So with different contexts, we have different thoughts. So, in the case of a temporal sentence, we have an incomplete expression of a thought. Which thought is that?
Yeah.
It cannot be one of those many thoughts, one of those many complete thoughts that we may get when combining the sentence, so to say, with different contexts. So, what do we mean there with a thought?
Yeah.
Which thought is that? Or is it maybe an incomplete expression of something, but not a thought?
Yeah. No, yeah, I see your point.
It's a very difficult question. I don't know what you mean.
I understand your point now, that the way in which I express incomplete expression of a thought is kind of, I would say, like a little bit contradictory, because if you say that there is incomplete expression, then cannot be thought there, right? That would be like the way I understand you, like you cannot say a thought there. Because I'm playing here with this intuition I have, that the important thing is to separate, to express things in time, to express in time, and what is expressed, right? Then I would say, the incomplete experience of, I need an expression. I could say maybe the incomplete expression of X, you say, because actually the sense express, I don't have any problem to say that the sense express is complete in some sense, you know, but it's complete. So you know that you don't have arguments there. You don't have arguments in the content. You don't have a functional expression with an argument there. This is complete in this technical sense, saturated, as it were. I don't have any problem in saying that, but it's not a thought at all. So I cannot say incomplete expression of a thought.
So maybe just jumping.
Yeah.
I have many questions, but I'm going to jump on this.
maybe you can help me out, because I see the problem of how I put it into words that is not accurate enough. I see your point, yeah. But I'll think how to put it into words. It's very, very helpful, really. Yeah, sorry. Okay,
no. I was thinking that maybe the distinction has to do with the theories in that paper, and also with the distributions between having a sense, a sentence having a sense, and a sentence expressing a sense. So to be two different things. So the sense can have a grammatical complete sentence that isolated have a sense, but that sense is not a thought. It is incomplete. And then can be completed somehow in the verbal expression.
I'll have a look. Yeah.
Something similar. My question was a couple of things. One is this initial reduction. I see it like, well, maybe the initial that is at the beginning, but then it disappears, right? Because it seems to me that that can be right, but maybe the Begriffschrift, he has this project of building a logic, and then it makes sense to have a correspondence with time and the content. But then in natural language, maybe that's the one that's in mind in sense of reference, you realize that that's not the case. It is sometimes you need a big context. But then I'm going to the question now. You said yesterday plus context expresses a thought. My question is, which thought? Is this made out of senses, or does it include the time of reference, an object? So we kind of go to your discussion. That is the same sense that would be expressed by someone the previous day saying today be?
Yes.
Or is it the same?
It's the same. And it's the same by someone who would say the 4th of December, I don't remember the example, Obama is sad, I don't remember if that was the example, or it would be the same as the day before whatever happened on the 5th, Obama was sad.
The past tense.
Yeah. So the problem exactly is that we don't know what are the constituents of the thought, because yesterday and today are modes of determination, and they are not part of whatever those senses are not part of the thought expressed. When there is context of utterance, when there is a complete expression of a thought.
But they must have the sense. I mean, that's what they contribute to the thought has to be sense.
They contribute just as modes of determination. That's the whole point. It's like in the same way as here.
Yeah. Which is not a sense. And it's not an object.
No, there is of course there is an object. There is a temporal object there. There is a temporal object there, but the relation between yesterday, today, tomorrow, and that temporal object is not the standard one of sense and reference. That's the whole point. This is by means of modes of determination. That's so interesting. That's so interesting that you are presuming.
The thought is made out of senses and something which is not a sense and is a mode of determination.
No. Exactly, that's what I am opposing. That's exactly what I am opposing. That's exactly what I am criticizing in other authors. So, sorry.
So is the moment a constituent of the thought?
No. Thought is sense. Is the third, el tercer reino, no? Is sense. But there is an unknown, a mysterious element there that we don't know. That is the constituent of the thought, that is not a time object, because that's reality, and that is determined but not expressed, because, so we would have, let's see if I can, we have here sense, I am improvising, right, thought, so I don't know if I'll get it, but thought, and then this would be a kind of black box, right? Black box. And then this would be language. It would be world, reality, whatever you want to put here, right? I don't want to get into ontological things here, right? So here you will have the day 4th of December. That's the day 4th of December. Here you would have whatever, Obama and his sadness, say, no? And then here we have some constituents. But the one that corresponds to this day, we don't know which one is it. It is to say, oh, yeah, that's what Wittgenstein criticizes in the Tractatus. Keep analyzing, you know, you don't have, in the expressions, you don't have exactly the elements of the sense expressed.
So constituents of what?
So, of sense.
Not of the thought.
So, of thought, because here sense is,
okay.
we are here, you know, with a context of utterance. Say, I'm going to try like to say today is, I'm going to talk about your, ¿cómo lo llamo? Exercise yesterday, or event yesterday, about whatever the event of Kepa was yesterday, right? So I have here, I have a sentence like yesterday, Kepa had a great event. Say, right? I don't know. Anyway, then I'm saying it today, right? So there is context of utterance, so there is complete expression of a thought. The complete expression of a thought is, you know, whatever the sense I associate to Kepa, well, the function and a great event. This is very problematic how to analyze the sense, but this is not my problem now. I'll have here different constituents. And then, of course, there will be here something corresponding to the time that has been determined but not presented. This is the whole point. That has been determined but not presented by this plus this. And then here there is some constituent. So in a way, what I'm saying is we really don't have in language the analysis of the thought expressed. Just there's a determination from the outside. That's the whole point, right? And then they say, but then you are saying that we don't know the constituents of the expressed thought. Yes, I am saying that, and I'm convinced. Yeah. Yeah, that's why Frege's, that's why the Tractatus comes and says the analysis has to come, keep going, you know, because Frege thinks that he has analyzed thought, but he has not. So I am also aware of criticisms of Wittgenstein that there is a one and complete analysis of the expression, and whatever you see in language is not the analysis of thought. No? So there are a lot of things that I have seen in Wittgenstein that are criticisms of this. Maybe not this particular difficulty, although maybe if I go to some transition works in Wittgenstein, I could find something. I'm going to look for it, right? No, so because that's not in the Tractatus.
One last short.
But thank you for pressing me to get the point clear. Mm-hmm.
Just very small.
Yeah, no, yeah, but
I truly like it. But when you found this kind of expression of a word and well, maybe it's close to the second Wittgenstein. When you say, when you're speaking about the first Christian canon, you say, well, the mouth is part of.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, I have. This is closer to what I have in mind. That there are like parts in the expression of thought that Frege in the conceptual notation was not aware at all because he was worried about mathematics. And then when it comes to, that's very important, the natural languages is the problem in sense of reference. It comes to the subjects who speak, then, you know, yeah, we use the mouth in particular times, and we are, you know, communicating subjects. That's it. That's closer to what that is a very interesting thing because Frege is always, you know, the semanticist, not the pragmaticist, right? And there is some pragmatics here. There's some pragmatics here in the beginning of.
Just one final question. You don't claim to be the most Fregean of all, right? in this debate,
yeah.
some of the people, no, this is,
no,
this
because
interpretation is not regular. That's
no,
go against
no, that's a very,
you are not neo-Freudian, you are whatever.
No, that's very good. No, the thing is that the neo-Fregians introduce new ideas to, like, to fix these kinds of problems, and then they have another Frege. Okay, right, I am not that Frege. I am the Frege that is in the works. It's like in the Tractatus. I had like the same problem in the Tractatus to speak with people, right? Because they want to defend the Tractatus, and then they start like changing things or understanding things in different ways about what is the form of the object, and then, well, this is not what Wittgenstein actually says, if you really want to understand what Wittgenstein. So I am trying to understand what Frege says in his works and in his texts. Maybe I can change things to make more sense of Frege. Yes, maybe. I don't want to do that. So a neo-Fregian could say, no, but be more caritative, you know, be more caritative and think that Frege would have done this. Yeah, but he didn't do that. So that's what I'm trying to interpret Frege. That's the whole point. So, but there is a way of interpreting authors that is trying to make sense of them, even if you need to complete or to modify some thesis. Then if this is really to understand an author, then I am not Fregean. But if to understand an author is like to, because you see from what I have presented, I've gone through very, very close to the text, right, to understand really what he's trying to do. And then I think that this is the way to be most Fregean. This is what I think, but, you know, this could be controversial, I think, yeah. Anyway, so it's been great. Thank you. It was very helpful. So yeah, very helpful. Thank you very much. Thank you.